What is going on YouTube? This is Acid Root. So I'm going to review the third album by Nicki Minaj. Basically, this project is called The Pinkprint, and it came out in the late fall of 2014. So the thing about this particular album is this is a more hip-hop influence type album as far as I kind of went. It doesn't really carry much like the dance pop type vibes that Roman Reloaded or the kind of more kind of pop, hip-hop pop. And it also doesn't have like the pop rap approach of like Pink Friday 1 as far as I kind of went. It's probably a little bit closer to Pink Friday 1 more so than Roman Reloaded, but I would definitely have to say about this album, this is kind of more of like a steadfast kind of hip hop album circa 2014, 2015 as far as that kind of happens. It's interesting. This was a pretty commercial album. This had some of Nicki Minaj's biggest hits on here, particularly Anaconda, which was a big deal back in 2014 when that song came out. But I'd have to look after it. It's just this album is a good amalgamation of things I'd have to say, but I think I kind of preferred the more commercial moments more so than like the more traditional kind of senses of like album cuts. I just feel like Nicki Minaj on these album cuts this time, it's not necessarily a dicey album, but it's kind of in the neighboring community of that, just because I would have to suppose that it does have a lot of commercial appeal and does that pretty well. It's definitely a pretty rampant album. It's definitely a pretty rampant album when this album particularly kind of cuts loose as far as it kind of happens. But I just feel like the songwriting, or at least the beat productions, or at least the production choices on this particular album are just not quite as harrowing this time as far as it kind of went. I kind of feel like the songwriting and the overall productions on some of this album are just not quite as heavy hitting as like the previous couple albums. Now, the first Pink Friday just had the exorbitant kind of feel, just having a lot of songwriting. And now the first Pink Friday had a lot of exorbitant songwriting just within all the singles. And so that was kind of the same thing with Roman Reloaded as far as I kind of went. But just with when the things are narrowed down a little bit, it's just a little bit more not necessarily obvious, but it's just kind of the concept that it just for some reason just didn't quite feel as candid and quite as showy this time as far as I kind of went. I mean, I kind of look after there definitely need to be more songs like Anaconda and Only. It's kind of like a multifaceted album, but the problem with it is some of the other facets about this particular album are just not quite as showy and like a glamorous kind of sense as far as trying to have like some of these songs are just not quite as showy in like a glamorous sense as far as being compelling as far as they kind of have. It's not to say this is a bad album. It's definitely going to get over a decent score as far as they kind of have. It's just kind of the fact that I do think that the first two albums by Nicki Minaj just kind of stampede over this in a lot of ways. They just have a lot more vivacity and just overall electricity. But Nicki Minaj sounds more comfortable on this particular album. She just has the songwriting, at least in the execution of how the lyrics are kind of conveyed on here. She does get pretty lyrical on this particular album. I do feel like the singles has definitely gotten bolstered just because it just feels a lot more comfortable and just a lot more kind of somewhat effortless as far as that kind of happens. I just think the pitch, like Anaconda, is a more comfortable single than some of the stuff she did with like. I feel like Anaconda is a more comfortable single than Starships or some of the ones off of Pink Friday 1 as far as that kind of happens, like Super Bass or some of those type ones. Now those were definitely some snappy hits, but these are just a little bit more comfortable. I feel like Anaconda is a more comfy song. Only it's a pretty comfy song. Bed of Lies and Pills and Potions are Bed of Lies and Pills and Potions are definitely some kind of ornate type songs on here for like the makeshift sense as far as I kind of have. So she's fleshed that out a lot more as far as I kind of have. And then The Night Is Still Young is kind of like another EDM type tune. So I'm only going to review the standard edition with the 16 songs. I'm not going to review like on Spotify there's like a 23 song edition, so she added a bunch of songs to this particular project, which is pretty dope. I do want to check those out, and I'll probably review them at a later point, just like I did with Pop Smoke when he dropped his deluxe as far as I'm going to have, and I'll get to that one at a later point. But I would have to say I'm going to review the standard 16 song edition, and then the other 7 songs will come along down the road. But I would have to say this is a pretty solid album. I'd have to suppose definitely good, but I do feel like I think it didn't have like the sheer full blown varietized kind of bite as far as it kind of happened with this like the album cuts as far as it kind of went. But we'll go ahead and talk about some of these. So there's 5 singles I'm going to talk about. I'm not going to mention truffle butter this time, but we'll get to that next time. But as far as this kind of happens, the first single is Pills and Potions. So the first single is Pills and Potions. This is basically like a somber, kind of sobering, makeshift late day malaise of a song. I'd have to say it's a dope new angle from Nicki, I would definitely suppose. And it's just got a vivid hook. So this is definitely a pretty highlighted type one. It's kind of a more recent Nicki Minaj tune when you look past like Starships and some of the singles like Super Bass and some of those type ones from her early Pink Friday kind of days. This is a good angle from Nicki Minaj just to kind of get that sort of particular kind of commotion as far as that kind of happens. It's a good kind of steadfast type tune as far as that kind of happens. Just a real nice kind of hit, just in like the standard late day kind of malaise and just kind of standard commerce as far as that kind of happens. Just kind of the standard commerce and just kind of more of like a regular kind of almost blue collar type appeal, but just kind of straightforward as far as that kind of goes. I definitely like the pitch of this particular one. It's just a nice one. Nicki Minaj kind of popped pills on this particular album. I saw in a hip hop article not too long ago that she talked about that she was, I don't know if it was Percocets, but she was popping some sorts of pills. She mentions that a few times throughout this album, so it's too bad about that. But I kind of look after it. There are some mentions of that. So Nicki Minaj might not have been in the best space in 2014, but I'd have to say. So basically, the second single on here is Anaconda. This is a pretty nice one. Definitely like this one as a highlight. This is like a slithering, kind of creepy nightclub smash of a song. I definitely would have to say it's kind of the song nowadays is kind of an underappreciated Nicki single, I'd have to say, and it just kind of feels that way, especially in today's times. This is not a song that gets that much airplay in today's times anymore, I definitely have to suppose, but it's definitely a song that doesn't seem to get that much airplay today, despite the fact that it hit #2 on like the Billboard 100 as far as it can happen, which is kind of a disappointment. But I look after it, this is still a song that slaps pretty hard, so it's definitely a pretty massive song. This is one of the biggest rap songs out of 2014 as far as it can happen. Nicki had a pretty vivid album cover. It was definitely a pretty awesome cover to kind of get as far as that kind of went. Definitely pretty nice, good. Definitely pretty nice hit out of 2014. It's probably one of the better rap songs out of the 2010s, even today. Definitely one of the better rap songs out of the 2010s, looking back on that particular decade. It's just one that's kind of definitely underappreciated in today's times. It samples like Baby Got Back by, I forget that dude's name. I think it's like, I forget his name. I can't remember it. Uh, it's not Jam Master Jay, but it's like, oh, I can't remember it. I mean, he dropped the album in 1992. I know that. Like I forget the dude's name, but it's just kind of the concept. We could be here for minutes upon minutes, me trying to remember. I just would have to say, but he dropped the album in 1992. It's like, yeah, I don't know why I can't remember that dude's name, but it came Baby Got Back from 1992. I forget the dude, but it's just kind of the concept. It's a pretty good hit. Definitely Nicki Minaj had a good reimagining of it as far as I can have. It's just a definite highlighted one, I would have to say. But the third single is Only. I definitely had to say about this particular one. It's kind of a vintage Young Money, Gleamy Night Venue fare of a song, I'd have to say. Lil Wayne, Chris Brown, and Drake are all on here. Lil Wayne and Drake from Young Money are on here. It's just a good kind of pitch to kind of get some Young Money type music as far as I can have as to how long it's been, just within that sort of sense. This is definitely some lyrical exercise, I would have to say. It's just a regular night at times, I would definitely feel like, and it's just a pretty good jammer. So this is a pretty good highlighted hit. Definitely like the beat on this particular one. It's just a real slinky type tune that just hits pretty heavily, I would definitely suppose. Just a good highlighted. This is just great for some vanilla night fare. I mean, I feel like this song is pretty vanilla in terms of standard times. This is like commercial rap circa 2014. If the stuff was not DJ Mustard around this time, it was definitely probably Nicki Minaj that was probably pretty popular in 2014, 2015. This is definitely probably one of the bigger songs of like the mid 2010s in terms of rap music. This is a song that I continue to hear get sampled on TikTok and things like that. So this is a pretty good overall appeal of a song. Definitely feel like just within that pitch. Chris Brown has a pretty good hook on here. It's definitely one of the better ones on the album, I'd have to say. Just an overall pretty pitched type song to kind of get. This is just an easy kind of highlight off this album. Bed of Lies is the fourth single. This has Skylar Grey on the hook. This is a pretty good combination. Nicki Minaj and Skylar Grey, they definitely do a great job with this particular song. This is like a bustling, kind of steadfast day commerce. And this is definitely kind of a bustling, steadfast day commerce of a song, I'd have to say. It's an in motion, and this song has in motion and restless appeal about it, I definitely would have to suppose. And it's just a good blue collar kind of song, and it just has a great hook. So Skylar Grey really gives her all for. Skylar Grey really does a great job with helping out on this particular song. Beyonce helps out on a song on here too. She does a pretty good job. I feel like a lot of the hook artists really gave Nicki some real good hooks on here. It's just some good stuff to kind of get a lot of these. Definitely has some good pitches, but I definitely like the appeal of Bed of Lies. This is just kind of like a more steadfast type one, more kind of down low. Bed of Lies is just kind of more like a regular kind of makeshift type song as far as I can have. It's just similar pitch like Pills and Potions, I would have to say. It's just good to get some of these type ones, but they're both pretty comfortable as far as that kind of pitch would kind of happen. Just like the overall affair of this particular song. This kind of works in, this really works great for like some evening commerce, just winding down some stuff like that just within that pitch. I'm not going to review the fifth single, Truffle Butter, yet. We'll get to that when I review the deluxe of this particular album. But the sixth single, which is the fifth single in terms of what I'm going to review, but the sixth single is basically The Night Is Still Young. And this is a pretty highlighted type pitch. So if you like Nicki Minaj and you really truly miss like the Roman Reloaded days from 2012 when she was just more on like that dance and EDM type stuff, this is a good revamp as far as that kind of goes. Definitely like the pitch of getting this particular song. This is like vintage Roman Reloaded type tune. I would definitely have to say it's a snappy kind of light dubstep dance gem. Definitely, it's just some late night fun. So I definitely like the appeal of this. I kind of question why Nicki Minaj has so much disdain for kind of like EDM and the dance craze type stuff for like the early 2010s, because this is definitely some great stuff to kind of get here. It's a good kind of concept to get like another revamp type tune. It's definitely pretty good to get a revamped, kind of refurbished Nicki Minaj type tune just in the dance EDM type craze, just getting some new type stuff just within that particular pitch, I would have to say. Definitely was something that needed to happen way more. It's just too bad. Like I was saying, it's too bad that she has disdain for it, but I like the concept of just getting this particular one. It's just an easy kind of highlight and a good hit. It's a good hit sixth single and really carried the energy of this particular album. So all the singles really had some pure and kind of home run type damage that they did. This is definitely Nicki back on her particular pitch, and she really dominated like the early 2010s. She was basically here every year of the early 2010s. She was definitely here every year of like the early 2010s if you count the re-up EP that dropped in late 2012 that crested into 2013. So I just would have to say Nicki Minaj completely dominated like the early 2010s. This album is pretty steadfast. I'd have to say it's a steady kind of album. It's not a full-blown home run as far as that kind of happens, but I do like the definite. I feel like the Pinkprint is a pretty steady album as far as that kind of happens. I just like the pitch of this particular one. It definitely has some comfortable singles, but the album cuts are a little bit questionable in certain senses, I'd have to say, and maybe not full-blown, but we'll get to that as far as that kind of happens. We'll kind of look after some of these, but I would have to say this is a pretty steady album. I remember giving like Roman Reloaded like an 8.5 or an 8.75, something like that out of 10. I almost gave Pink Friday 1 a 10. I gave the re-up a 10, I'd have to say, but this one's probably a shade underneath Roman Reloaded in terms of quality, but I still would have to say it's good. It's definitely something you don't want to miss. And it's definitely one that you don't want to miss, and it continues to live up to Nicki Minaj's legacy. It just is kind of, we'll get to it. So we'll talk about some of these. So basically, so there's 16 songs on this particular album, and out of those 16, I wound up recommending to you 10. So that's a pretty good concept about that. We'll go ahead and recommend these 10 songs. So they would be Pills and Potions, Anaconda, Only, Bed of Lies, The Night is Still Young, Feeling Myself, Get on Your Knees, I Lied, All Things Go, and Want Some More. So we'll talk about some of these. So one of which is a pretty good pitch is Want Some More. This is basically like a Travis Scott like rollout tune. I'd have to say it's like an early bird kind of trap hit, definitely, and just has a thumping bass, and it's just a rowdy kind of stunt hit, I would feel like. So if you like the early 20, if you like trap music from like the 2010s, but you like the early variations of it, the stuff that was kind of popping in like 2013, 2014, when folks like Drake and Travis Scott and Future and Migos were kind of doing some of that as far as that kind of went. Nicki Minaj very briefly does a song like that. She doesn't do a ton of songs like that on this particular album. Kind of doesn't really have much acknowledgement of trap as far as that kind of happens, but I would definitely say that this particular song is at least a variation of getting Nicki Minaj kind of on like the trap music that would dominate for like the rest of the decade and so on. It's a good pitch to kind of get that. It's interesting kind of see Nicki Minaj kind of do that because she pulled it off pretty well. All Things Go, the first song you hear on this album, is a pretty good highlight also. This is like a regular kind of steady night commerce of a song, I'd have to say. It's an out and about, but not necessarily party prone type tune, I'd have to suppose, and it's just good for some night ruminating. So this particular one, I kind of feel like this one's definitely for some night commerce, All Things Go, as far as that would kind of happen. It's just not quite one that kind of has like the eccentric kind of riveting kind of get crazy bottle popping kind of times as far as the bottle popping type times as far as that would kind of happen just within that pitch. I definitely would say it's great for some kind of outing fare, but it's just kind of a little bit more steady, as in maybe you're just going to pay bills or just buying a shirt or clothes or something like that. Just within a relatively regular kind of evening as far as that fare would kind of happen, I would have to say. I Lied's a pretty nice one. This is similar to Pills and Potions and like Bed of Lies, I would have to suppose. This one's kind of a sobering, kind of morose pop rap commerce of a song, definitely. It's similar to Lil Wayne's Mirrors off of like the Carter 4, I'd have to say. Or it's similar to Lil Wayne's Mirrors song off the Carter 4. It's definitely a pretty nice one in that sort of pitch. And this is kind of a moody and subdued type song, but it's still pretty. This is kind of a moody and subdued type song, I'd have to say, but it's still pretty catchy. I would definitely look after. So this is kind of one. Kind of has a little bit of like an electric type rave bit. Has a little bit of electricity in the verses, I'd have to say, but for the most part, it's kind of a sing-songy kind of pop rap type tune, very similar to Pills and Potions. I would definitely kind of say it's another one that probably could have been a single. Definitely pretty this makeshift type tune that just works in that sort of sense. So it's good to get Nicki Minaj doing some of those pitches just within that context, just as to how that kind of happens. It's a pretty nice one. A real good highlight on here that was like a surprise hit, I'd have to say, is Get on Your Knees. These are some more team ups with Ariana Grande and Nicki Minaj. They usually do a bunch of good songs together, so this is a pretty good highlight. This is definitely like a plush kind of R&B velvet of a song. Definitely have to say this is like a smooth cut that's great for evening kickback, I would have to suppose, and this is just like some ritzy pizzazz, and it's pretty hooky. This is definitely like some ritzy pizzazz, and it's pretty hooky. So this one just has a great super stellar hook on here as far as that kind of happens. Just overall like the pitch of Get on Your Knees. This is just a pretty damn stellar type one that just hits quite heavily. I'd have to say just some real nice R&B type tune that works. Get on Your Knees is just a pretty good R&B hip hop type tune that works pretty well. So this is like the female version of something that Drake would do just in that sort of pitch. Just a real velvety type tune that just has a lot of good smooth vocals and just overall appeal that just works in that highlight kind of sense. That's a definite nice one. Feeling Myself is another hit. This has Beyonce on here, and they both. Feeling Myself is a pretty highlighted one. This has Beyonce on the backing vocals. This is just an overall hit, I'd have to say. Just really like the pitch of this particular one. It's just a hyphy like woozy kind of nightclub haze of a song. I definitely would have to say it's just a good swaggerish kind of. The song is just some good swaggerish kind of bop and heat. Definitely, I feel like this is a dope Beyonce assist. I would feel like on this particular song, it's just an overall gem. So I definitely like the thizzy kind of appeal of this particular song. It's a real kind of Mac Dre type like beat. This really feels like something that the song really feels like something that E40 or Keek the Sneak or Mr. Fab would do. Some of those type folks in that sort of pitch. Just a real hyphy like tune. Just really like the appeal of it. It's a good highlight. It's kind of uncommon for Nicki as far as that kind of pitch kind of happens. It's kind of a swaggerish type tune that works pretty damn well. And then that basically takes care of it. So to talk about some of the songs I didn't enjoy on here, I kind of feel like the middle of the album. And then to talk about some of the songs I didn't recommend on here, some of these were just kind of bunk type feels that just overall didn't have a good pitch just within the assortment, how they kind of went. I kind of felt like The Crying Game was just a poor kind of makeshift type song. I I almost thought that Jesse Ware was Jesse J because they did a song called Bang Bang back in 2014 as far as it kind of went, but this one's just a different person. But I still kind of feel like this one just was like a poor makeshift type tune that just didn't really pull it off that well. Just had a pretty clumsy type beat. And some of these, there's like a string of songs in like the middle of the album, like Four Door, like some of these songs like Four Door, Aventador, and Favorite, and Buy a Heart, and Trina Dem Girl. Some of these particular ones just kind of had some clumsy type pitches. I definitely felt like the kind of tropical summery type vibes of I definitely felt like some of the summery tropical type vibes of Buy a Heart and Trina Dem Girls were just kind of clumsy and just kind of didn't really add up to much. I would definitely have to suppose these were just kind of ones. I definitely think the dance pop type vibes, the summery type dance pop type vibes of Roman Reloaded just hit a lot heavier than some of these kind of more just tropical type ones that just didn't really have a good pitch. They just kind of felt limp and just kind of flat. They just didn't really have the electricity that they need. It was kind of surprising from Nicki that she wasn't able to nail these better. Favorite was just kind of a poor R&B type tune that just didn't really have a pitch or an interesting beat to kind of have. And then Four Door Aventador was just kind of a poor type tune. This one was trying to be like a ritzy kind of cruising out type tune with some finesse and kind of overall grace, but it just didn't really nail the feel as far as trying to do that one. I kind of felt like Nicki just didn't have like the gracefulness on this particular song that I was kind of looking for. It just didn't really have the appeal as to the pitch that it needed. Then Grand Piano is just kind of a more homely and kind of sombering, kind of similar song to like Bed of Lies and like Pills and Potions, but it just didn't pull it off quite as well. This one was just a lot more of like a homely type song that just didn't really have a good pitch. So that's kind of the concept about this particular album. So me recommending basically 10 songs out of 16 on this particular album. I'm going to go ahead and give this album like a 7.25 out of 10. I feel like there's some good pitches about this album as far as I kind of went. Definitely has some good commercial moments, just great commercial moments and great singles, a lot of comfortable songwriting, this overall appeal that feels kind of effortless when it does do it correctly. But I just was surprised with some of these album cuts that just didn't quite nail it. Some of these summary type tunes and some of these kind of just extra type ritzy type fares that just didn't really have a lot of heat. I mean, for the most part, it's just kind of nitpicking. I kind of feel like The Crying Game was just a poor makeshift. The Aventador song was just a poor ritzy type tune. Favorite was just a poor R&B type tune, and Grand Piano was just a poor kind of makeshift kind of, or Grand Piano is just a poor kind of homely type tune. It's just kind of the concept that still they do lag on to the album just as their execution not being better. It's just kind of in the pitch of just being able to say that. It's just kind of interesting because Nicki just had more snappy kind of songwriting, this overall appeal on her first two albums, I'd have to say. It's not to say that this is a bad album. I feel like the songs that are good are very exuberant and boisterous. It's just kind of the concept that there's just a little bit more jet lag this time as far as that kind of goes. But the social score of this album, I'm going to give an 8.75 out of 10. Despite the fact that there's not a ton of nightclub songs in this particular album, I do feel like the commercial appeal and bite of this particular project has a lot to offer. There's just some good songwriting and overall moments that just have a lot of social kind of spark and appeal. There are some nightclub songs, even though there's not a ton of them. I'd say that there's enough to be able to have a decent time. It has some R&B type tunes. She pulls off most of the new tricks that she tries to pull off, and just has some decent variety. It's just kind of the concept that there's just like a couple lagging type ones that kind of detracts from it. But 6 singles, the fact that Nicki Minaj on every one of her albums has gotten past the 5th or 6th singles, pretty damn good. So that's to be applauded as far as that kind of happens. I like the concept of it. Had the budget, had some great hooks on here, just a lot of snaz and overall casual kind of appeal that just had a lot of marketing and just overall flash that just makes it very appealing and attention grabbing, I'd have to say. So 8.75 social. In terms of the future, like Nicki Minaj dropped an album in December of 2023 called Pink Friday 2. So we'll have to see about some more of these. I'm going to get to some more Nicki Minaj projects, including her mixtape. So we'll definitely get to some more of these as the year progresses, just within that pitch. But this is definitely a pretty solid one here. It's definitely above average, I'd have to say. This is definitely above average, I'd have to say. It has some hit singles on there, and more often than not, it does have a bunch of hit appeal.